now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Thank you so much, Becky, and welcome everybody to another edition of the Ted Wallachin Podcast. This is a special and a different edition, and I got to tell you something. This is not our idea, but I embraced the idea when it first came across my email. A friend that I've met in the podcast world, his name is Andrew Applebaum. He does a wonderful podcast called Toronto Legends. I was honored to be one of his guests on his program. He reached out to me and he said, listen, would you like to do a feed drop, meaning like a podcast flip, where 1 week we take one of his podcasts, put it in our designated little slot in the podcast world, and he takes one of ours and puts it into his. So people who are regularly listening in for one of his shows will hear one of our shows. In fact, he's chosen an episode that we did with the legendary broadcaster, Hall of Famer, Roger Ashby. And for our episode, we have chosen his interview that he did with comedian Paul Reiser. Now, before we go into that, I can tell you that you can check out his episodes at www.torontolegends.ca/episode/. Paul Reiser, most of you will remember from the hit television show Mad About You, which he not only starred in, but he also created it. He created it, and he starred with the great Helen Hunt. He's also appeared in 4 of Eddie Murphy's Beverly Hills Cops movies, along with a whole bunch of different other things here and there. He's a very, very talented guy, and it's a really, really quite fascinating interview. So here now, our friend Andrew Applebaum from Toronto Legends and his guest, Paul Reiser.
Paul is the definition of the multi-hyphenate performer, an actor, television writer, author, musician, and of course, a stand-up comedian. In fact, Paul is leaving his cozy California confines and traveling across the continent to appear live on March 18th at our very own The Rose Brampton with a stand-up performance starting at 8 p.m. Tickets are available now at therosebrampton.ca. Welcome, Paul, to Toronto Legends. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back to Canada, and more specifically, Brampton and the wider GTA or Greater Toronto Area.
I am honored to be a part of everything you just said.
Fantastic. Well, I want to jump right into your connections to Toronto and our wider country of Canada. Any memories of either touring or filming, just visiting? Do you have any family connections in the Great White North?
Not that I'm aware of. I know, but last time I was in Toronto was 2 summers ago. I was there for a few days filming a couple episodes of The Boys, which was fun. And that was right in the summer, and it was beautiful. And it makes one forget about the fact that you have a lot of snow and freezing cold.
We do, but we have committed to getting it all cleared away before you show up.
That. It's a lovely city. It always felt to me like New York, but just a little bit more civilized and less intense.
Well,
having grown up in New York, so any city that feels like New York feels like home to me. I've enjoyed my time. I've been there periodically for a quick little. I performed a couple of some corporate events and charity events in Toronto, but I haven't been there for a while, and I'm looking forward to do a stand-up. I haven't done. I think the first time I did was Montreal at the Laugh.
Just for Laughs.
Just for Laughs Festival, and that was like 1986. So that's a while ago. Every 40 years, I like to come to.
Well, that's a good time period. Paul, you are now returning to not only your roots in stand-up comedy, but to the craft that you have said you enjoy the most, being on stage solo with direct audience contact. You've done it all. Why is stand-up comedy still your favorite artistic medium?
Something I wouldn't have thought about when I first did it. When I started, and first time I ever went on stage to try stand-up, I was 18. I was in college. And I didn't know what I was doing, obviously. And if I knew how bad I was, I probably would never have gone up. But that was my goal, and I didn't have any dreams of stand-up, of film and TV. But one of the things that's only I've come to appreciate now is the immediacy that you talk about. When you do a show, a TV show or a movie, it's often great. And, I've been really fortunate to be in, Stranger Things, which is the biggest global hit you can imagine, and in some great films. But there was the fruit of that is often when they come out, and they're being enjoyed. They're not necessarily fun in the moment making them. And this is the piece that I wouldn't have appreciated if I hadn't had this experience. You don't have to go through 12 middlemen to get it set up. You want to do a TV show where you got to write it, you got to sell it, you got to raise the money if it's a film, you got to have meet with executives, and it takes a million. There are long, slow births that often don't lead anywhere. And stand-up is just so uncomplicated in that way. It's just, you think of something funny, you say it, and as you said, the audience is right there. So there's no wait time. They'll tell you right there if it's funny. You don't have to wonder.
And you've also noted, Paul, that this is one of the few things that you can do in your 60s that is close to how you did it back when you were 19 years old.
Yeah, for sure. That was startling to me when I had taken a long time off and I hadn't performed. And when I went back into the clubs, I was realizing it was as fun, it was as challenging, as exciting, as unpredictable. And I thought, I had the same sort of excitement and adrenaline rush that I felt when I went up as a younger guy. And there aren't a lot of things that replicate. It was startlingly identical. It was in that way. It was almost no difference. The difference was, years later, hopefully I know what I'm doing a little better than I did at 18. It was an interesting thing when I went up the first time, going up a couple of years ago, and I would swing by the local comedy club here down in Hermosa Beach, California. There's a great club called the Comedy Magic Club. And I would go and show up on a Tuesday night, and they would be nice enough to put me up. And the audience, now, while they know you, they would go, and there was a long stretch where I hadn't been on TV or anything. So it's like, it's exciting, and they're clapping, and that's good for about 12 seconds. And then they're looking at you like, and what is it you'd like to tell us? I went, oh yeah, that's the part I don't have figured out yet. I thought I'd come. And so all that goodwill and recognition is nice, but it doesn't carry through. You still have to have some chops and something to say.
You still got to bring it.
Now,
Paul, I'm sure you can appreciate that if you tell 10 people that you were going to be having a conversation with Paul Reiser, you will literally get 10 different suggestions for the must-ask questions. I, of course, want to talk to you about Mad About You. My wife wants me to ask you about the movie Diner. My dear mother has literally read all your books on families and parenting, and she has Jewish mother commentary she wanted me to share. I have various friends who want to talk about Aliens, The Boys, Reboot, Beverly Hills Cop. Now, of course,
I like that everyone had questions, but your mother had comments.
You got it. She had comments.
And criticisms, I'm sure.
Well, perhaps a few. Now, Paul, you get approached by fans all the time. I want to know, how good is your radar towards anticipating what particular project an approaching fan recognizes you for? Is it from 20 feet away, 15 feet? When do you know what they're going to be asking you about?
Well, it's sometimes it's simple. If a 10-year-old recognizes me, I know it's Stranger Things. Very few 10-year-olds have watched Mad About You at this point. So, for the longest while, Mad About You certainly opened things up. But I'm always surprised. I don't always see it coming. For years, and still, people will come over and do a line from Beverly Hills Cop, the first one, which was 40 years ago. And people will just say, hey, this is not my locker. I went, are you kidding? That was 40 years ago. But what I didn't understand is that for a long time, people would do twists on the line. I'd be at an airport, somebody go, hey, this is not my suitcase. I went, no, it's my suitcase. No, it's not. I go, oh, you're doing a bit. Okay. It took me a while to understand that. It's always surprising and refreshing. About a few years ago, it was the first time I went to an Aliens, like a Comic-Con sci-fi convention. And I literally didn't know that there is this subculture of people on that film specifically, people who watch that film every day, every week for 35 years, who have props, who have questions, and like, I don't know anything that you're talking about. I was in it. So I didn't know that subculture existed. And I'll tell you something else that was fun, and I didn't know this till I went out and did comedy, and I would, do meet and greets, and I'd talk to people after the show. And this is in the last 5-6 years, people would come over and they'd have a Mad About You story they felt they wanted to share. Like, oh boy, that joke, my wife and I do that joke all the time. Boy, and that thing that you really hit a nerve, and we had a big fight about that. Or we got married to your theme song. And it was new to me, because when the show was on in the 90s, we didn't have social media, so there wasn't a lot of interaction. And plus I was busy, so I didn't have these conversations. So it's been really heartwarming and enlightening to find out that something that we did 30 years ago almost, 30 years ago, had the impact and still continues to resonate with people. That's a really nice thing to know.
It's amazing, and it must feel great for you. I know, to offset my mother's anticipated criticisms, I want to share and personally thank you for something. And that's in over 100 interviews I've done for this Toronto Legends podcast. My 16-year-old daughter has had less than zero interest in any of the interviewees. And frankly, this includes you, Mr. Paul Reiser.
I should hope.
But when I casually mentioned that you had played Dr. Sam Owens on Stranger Things, things changed immediately. This interview is now the big story in the hallways of Richmond Green High School, and thus I am proactively thanking you for elevating my social status in both my own home and my community from a nobody to at least a somebody.
Well, it's somebody, and just so you know, it's short-lived. So my younger son got me into Stranger Things, like just in time, just before they called to offer me a role. He had told me about it. And so it was very cool. He was very excited that I was going to be on it. And then, so the second season when I was on it, I was talking to him and I said, it's funny. I would have watched season 1 because everybody was talking about it. I said, but season 2, to be honest, it's not my kind of show. I don't know that I would have watched it. And he said, with no trace of irony, Dad, I would have enjoyed season 2 a lot more if you were not in it. And he said, asshole, I use his Hebrew name. I said, asshole, I can, when you say that. But I remember he was with Springsteen, and he said his kids know maybe 2 of his songs. You have to work really hard to not know more Bruce Springsteen songs than 2. But that's the thing. Nobody, no matter how big a person is, their kids are will bring you right down to earth.
They will ground you.
They don't care.
But Paul, apparently the Dr. Sam Owens role was originally written as Dr. Reiser specifically for you by the Duffer Brothers. Is this accurate?
Yeah, that's what they told me, unless they were just lying to it. But yeah, no, they had, I know when I write things, you have a certain actor in mind. Even if you're not thinking of casting them, you just think it just helps you visualize it. So for whatever reason, they had me in mind. And then they figured, well, we could either cross it out or see if Reiser. And I had heard about the show on a Friday, or it came out on Friday, and I met them on a Monday, the following Monday, and they told me about this, and they were very sketchy at the time. I said, well, am I a good guy or a bad guy? They go, we don't know. I said, well, wait, you don't know, or you don't want to tell me? They go, no, we don't know. And I still don't know. I don't even know if I'm dead or alive. At the end of season 4, I'm left sort of shackled to a radiator and beaten up, and I went, I could come back if somebody opened the door and let me in, or they could have left me there to die. I don't know. Still don't know as we speak.
Well, what a great decision towards kind of exposing you to a whole new audience. Being in your 60s, I guess it was your son who gets the credit. Who was the cultural canary in the coal mine?
Yeah, that's what
made you realize.
My younger son, when he got me into the boys, well, he didn't get me into the boys. I got offered to join the boys, and I didn't know the show, and I hadn't even heard of it, to be honest, at the time. And I asked him, I said, hey, you know about the show? They want me to be on the boys. He said, oh, it's great, and you'll hate it. I said, well, that's just the worst selling point I've ever heard. But I watched it, and I said, oh, yeah, I get it. It is so over the top, but it is artfully over the top and deliberately over the top to the point of being funny and self-aware. So it was great fun. I had a great time doing that. It was really fun.
Now, of course, let's go back to your first love, stand-up. You started out, Paul, during summers, during college. When you weren't doing open mic nights yourself, you would go see live in the clubs of New York City. Who would you see? I mean, some incredible names.
You've done your homework, man. You've read everything I've ever done. Well, there were 2 pieces of that. When I was in high school, before I ever did stand-up, and I was 14, 15, my buddy and we would go down into the village, and we would see George Carlin So I'm thinking George Carlin was huge by 72. He was playing, big theater. So we saw him, so this must have been 71 or 70. That's how long ago. Robert Klein, David Steinberg. And then a few years later, when I was 18, 19, I would go to the clubs, on audition night. And the big thrill was you could hang out. They would tell you, all right, you passed that level of low bar. You can hang out. You're not going to get on stage, but you can hang out. So, this is 73, 74, and you're watching the new young guys. So it was Richard Lewis, it was Elaine Boosler, it was Richard Belzer, Richard, rest in peace, Richard, and David Say, Andy Kaufman, and then of course people would drop in. So David Brenner, who was huge, would drop in and do a set. Rodney Dangerfield would come on. He would come in and work out, only if he was doing a Tonight Show. And he would just come out and do 7 minutes, killer, boom, boom, boom. And then he would say, yeah, hey, I just want to try this out before I do it on the Tonight Show. He goes, I'm not going to do it on Tonight Show, try it out before I come here. That would be stupid. I'm not going to do it the other way around. Yeah, who else would come in? Robin Williams would pop in, and Billy Crystal would come back sometimes. You would see, but it was really the breeding ground. And sometimes I find that I tell people this all the time. Sometimes you can be inspired by greatness, but you can also be inspired by mediocrity. I remember in college, I would do it a few times in the summer. And then my senior year of college, in the spring, I was watching The Tonight Show, and a comic who was on, who I had only seen, I'd seen like a few months earlier in the summer. He was just sort of beginning. I went, wow, he progressed that far in 9 months that he's on The Tonight Show, and he did fine. But I remember thinking, well, he wasn't that great last summer. So I remember thinking, well, hell, I could do that. I mean, but it also underscored to me that what it takes is stage time and practice and elbow grease. It's like, well, I'm not going to get too far doing it twice a year. So you got to do it as many times as you can. And in the few years when I was in the beginning, when I was living in the city, you would try to do all the clubs, and you'd so often do 3 shows, 3 different shows, 4 shows. Sometimes, I remember I once did 7 shows, and my head exploded because I thought,
too much.
I said anymore. But that was, and it takes years. It takes years, and you tell people, young comics, like, give yourself 5 to 10 years to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you might get discovered sooner, but there is a great jeopardy, I think, in people getting discovered before they. I don't know if the rules of show business that we grew up on even apply anymore, because you can be huge just from YouTube or whatever, or by doing this thing in the streets. But my experience was that it was a good thing. You think you're so great, you've done it 6 times. Well, somebody's going to see me and make me a star. Thank God that didn't happen, because I didn't have the chops.
Yeah.
And I remember Stephen Wright, who was very much, his career was very different than trajectory than anybody else. But he went on The Tonight Show and just killed. And Johnny had him back like a few days later, which never happens. And luckily, fortunately, he had the skills and the material. He had enough material you could do 2 7-minute sets. But a lot of people would say, oh, I got to go away for 8 months.
Yeah.
Then it's that I can, respectably show on TV.
Well, Paul, you became a fixture on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Do you remember your very first appearance?
Yeah, very clearly. It was April of '82, and it was the week that Diner had just come out, and that was sort of a selling point, because I don't know if it was just on my merits as a stand-up alone. I don't know that I would have gotten tapped. There's always a gatekeeper that goes, "No, I don't know if Johnny's ready." I like it, but I don't know if Johnny would like it. And he was often wrong, because people said he didn't like Johnny Love. But I went on, and I remember being so prepared and working on it so long that I had this odd sense of calm that when I've seen it, it's on YouTube somewhere, that I go, oh my God, I'm talking so slowly, because I was told, you're going to be excited, so remember, slow down. And I slowed down. So if I was going any slower, I'd be going backwards. It was that slow.
Yeah.
But I remember it not being a shock. I remember it being one of those things where you've envisioned this moment so long, you've projected it, that when you get there, it actually feels like a jacket that was fit. You go, yeah, this feels right. This is exactly what I pictured.
You were prepared.
I was prepared. And then I didn't do it for a long time. I don't know that I did that well that they had me back, and I didn't come back for a few years. And then in '86, and again, I think it was because Aliens came out, and I came on with that. And then something clicked, and Johnny took a shine to me. And then I was on from like '86 to the end. When he was on '92, I was on a lot.
If you're enjoying this Toronto Legends interview, please check out the more than 175 additional episodes available anytime. We got TVO's Steve Paikin, our Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, Olympic gold medalist Donovan Bailey, Mark McCoy, and Bruni Surin, the King of Bay Street, Wes Hall, and Glass Tigers' Alan Frew. How they did it directly from the Toronto Legends themselves. All episodes available 24/7, 365, wherever you get your podcasts. Let's talk about that 1982 film, Diner, at 23 years old.
This is your wife's question, yeah?
Absolutely. Listen, I know you give me his advice.
It's usually guys who love that film, so I always love when a woman loves that film.
Absolutely. And as you would counsel me, start with your wife's question. Make sure it gets in there. You were 23 years old. You had no real career plan. You literally stumbled into an audition for Barry Levinson's film. 40 years later, Paul, it's amazing how many careers got launched from that movie. Kevin Bacon, Ellen Barkin, Steve Cooper,
it was so
York, Daniel Stern.
Yeah, it was a total accident. I was literally just hanging out with a buddy who was on his way to audition, and so I was waiting in the lobby, and then the casting director asked me to come in afterwards. I went, and I tried very hard to bow out of it. I said, "No, I'm not here for this. I'm just waiting for my buddy." But she pressed upon me to come back, and I came back the next day, and I met Barry Levinson. And a few weeks later, 2 weeks later, I was in Baltimore making the movie. And we recently had an event out here last year. It was the 40th anniversary of the film, so they had a special screening and a Q&A, and Barry Levinson was out of town filming, but it was Kevin Bacon and Steve Guttenberg and Timmy Daly and me. And it was we went out to dinner before, and we were reminiscing, and it just felt like old guys, like guys do, like diner guys do. It's like you don't need any prep. We hadn't spoken for a while, but you just hit the ground running, and we were remembering, just the silly stuff that we did. We in our knucklehead 8 weeks in Baltimore, and then it was Kevin Bacon said, kind of quietly, he goes, "Have you noticed when you go on a set now, we are the oldest people there?" I went, "Yes." When the hell did that happen? I was like, "You're older than the grips. You're older than the prop guy." Like, that's not right.
Well, my cultural touchstone, Paul, for you, of course, is Mad About You. Now, this was created by you, about you. I believe you had just gotten married in real life.
Yeah. I got married in '88, and then and the show was in '92, but we were developing it since '90. But my stand-up had wasn't entirely, but the best stuff in my stand-up, the stuff that was succeeding and the best stuff that felt truest was the relationship stuff. And I was talking about living together and how things change. And, I used to get dressed all by myself, but now I got to check, does this shirt go? Can I wear this? And, or I get to the door and my wife will go, "You're not going to wear that." I go, "Apparently I'm not." I go, "Okay." It's like, I don't know, how did I get out of the house before for the first 8 years? So after I had another TV experience, the takeaway for me was I had a much more clear sense of what I'd never wanted to do again and what kind of show I would want to do. And primarily that was, boy, I'd want to do a show that was small and that my friends would watch. It's nice to do a show that, my kids love your show. It's like, yeah, but I want to do a show where my peers, adults watch. So I was approached in '90 by a studio to develop a show for myself. And I said, well, I don't know that I would want to do another half hour, but if I did, it would be really small. It would be like a couple and just, the intricacies and intimacies of a marriage. And they said, go write that. And that became Mad About You. And the funny thing about it is when I would go pitch it to all the networks, every network, usually people will jump in on a premise like, well, what if it wasn't a Martian, or what if it was But in this case, when I was talking about, the examples and the little moments that happened in America, they would all chime in like we were friends and go, listen to this. So my mother-in-law is staying with us, and everybody had a thing. I said, I think we're onto something here because everybody is relating to this. And that was always the litmus test for us, is that people would always say, oh, man, you sound exactly like what happens in my house. That's the fight I had with my wife. That's the issue with my husband. And that was always music to our ears because, like, okay, we're doing something right.
And of course, so much of the success came from your chemistry with Helen Hunt. What was your litmus test?
She played the girl, right? Helen?
Yeah, I believe
Yeah, of course, yes. I might place the name. Okay.
You knew her from somewhere. How did you cast her, and how did you know that you would have that great chemistry?
Well, the funny thing, and again, I owe my wife not only my material, but the casting choice. My wife was very good friends with a woman who was friends with Ellen. In fact, I think they were the housemates. They shared a house. And they were having a dinner party. This was December of 91. So I was writing the pilot, and I don't know if I had finished it. Maybe I don't remember. But we went to this dinner party, and in my head, again, I had an image of an actress or two in my head that I was writing to it. Not that I would get them, but that's who I was thinking of. None of them looked like Helen Hunt. And we went to this dinner party, and it was, 8, 10 people. And I had never met Helen. And she was just charming and funny and lovely and real and, blazingly smart and just the right amount of neurotic and like offbeat in every way. And I just was intrigued. I thought she was just so great. And as literally walking out of the house, I turned to my wife. I said, "What do you think about her as you?" She goes, "Oh, she'd be great." So I remember I said to her, and Helen was just starting to get some traction in film, and she'd done Mr. Saturday Night with Billy Crystal, and she'd done Water Dance, and she was really, on her way, and was pretty clear she didn't want to do TV. So, but I asked her very gingerly and diplomatically, "Can I send you the script?" And she, as a very diplomatic, "Oh, sure, I'd be happy to read it." And just so you know, I'm not looking to do TV. And in her head, she was picturing, Welcome Back, Kotter, that she'd be the wife who says, "Oh, honey, you knucklehead," and, laugh at my joke. And she read the script and went, "Oh, it's actually a two-hander, and they're both funny, and they're both neurotic, and they're both, wanting this marriage. They're not pissing on the marriage. They both want this relationship to work to such an extent that actually they're both tripping over themselves." And she went, "Oh, I kind of like this. Now what do I do?" And I remember I said, "Well, come on, let's just come over to my house and let's read it and see how it feels." And that was, talk about how did I know she was right? It's like, not only was she funny and it felt right, but she's such a great actress and such a real actress that she can't just sit and read. She's got to do. And so we're in my kitchen in real life, and in a script, we're in the kitchen. So to make it active, she got up and she started cleaning my dishes in the sink, and she's putting dishes away. What the fuck? What are you doing? You don't have to do that. We'll look at it. No, it's in the script that said, "Oh, you were acting. Oh my God." That was so good. I was distracted. And so it was like, no more calls, please. Like, this is great. And again, you love who you love. She was not at all like I pictured. I was picturing my wife. And I was Ellen looks nothing like my wife. I went, yeah, but she's right. And she's the one. We laugh about it, but Helen and I, we did click so immediately. And there were differences in our tastes and sensibilities. And sometimes I'd want to lean a little this way, or she'd want to lean a little that way. But invariably, we would come in with notes. Like, we'd get the script and we'd both give our notes, and we'd like, yeah, identical notes. So you say it, I'll say it. We both. And then 3 years ago, we got to do the little revisit, which was great fun. And because we had 7 years of experience behind us and 20 years of friendship, so it was even more so. Plus, we had each raised kids, and we had, had life taken a bite out of us. So we just put that all in the script, and that was the fun of, frankly, of getting back not for us, but for the characters. We thought, last time you saw these people, they just had a brand new baby, and life was all laid out ahead of them. Well, what does 20 years do to you? Well, you're not newlyweds. Your dreams probably didn't pan out exactly as planned. You had some bumps you didn't expect. Your kid was more than a handful than you expected. And I thought, that's great fun to write. And it felt, even better. We were even closer, and I think those shows were as good or better than anything we did.
More of the Ted Wallachin podcast after this.
Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca. I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalik father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market, or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Woloshyn.
And you're listening to a special edition of the Ted Woloshyn podcast. It's a feed drop, or I like to call it a podcast flip. This week, instead of hearing me with a guest, you're going to hear my friend Andrew Applebaum, who hosts Toronto Legends. And you can check out his podcast at www.torontolegends.ca/episodes/. And the episode we're running is an interview that he did with comedian, actor, author, writer, Paul Reiser.
Well, it's so clear, Paul. You had earlier been kind of on the record that you would not do a reboot. And now that you have done it, clearly you enjoyed it.
I still say I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to do it. Well, we both were so clear. We used to laugh about it because for one reason, we loved the show and we were so proud of what we did. And we ended it exactly as we wanted to end it. We even gave a glimpse into the future. We said, here's what the next 20 years will look like, so that we'll never have to. We couldn't even be tempted if we wanted to. We go, sorry, we already shot our load. With the idea, the appeal was getting to play together again. And, because everybody was asking, they would do so many reboots. And I think when something's done, it should be done. But so many shows were having success with reboots that studios were inviting us and like, would you guys want to come back? And so we had to think about it. And in my head, part of the reason, as I say, part of the reason I didn't want to do it is that we ended it well and it was done. The other piece was, in my mind, whenever you see a reunion or a reboot, it's really mainly so the audience can go, wow, he put on. She doesn't look well. I think she had some work done. And it's like you're a circus. And it's like I didn't want to give anybody that satisfaction. So I go, you want to watch? Look at how I looked in '92.
Let's freeze it there.
Yeah. So, but I have to say, I'm really glad we did it. And we said, let's just do it once. And they, when your contract, what about second season? No, there's no second season. We're doing it one time. And if it's such a great hit and everybody loves it, we'll do more. But there's more to life than doing what you've already done. But I was very glad we did it. And we had, what was really interesting too, is how the cast, we had all been friends and we had kept in touch and we were, deep friends. But we hadn't assembled as a group. We hadn't all been together. And when we did 3 years ago, instantly, it's like getting the other dog. We were back and we get into the apartment and that physical space. It's like, were we gone 20 years or a week? Because it feels like we know exactly what to do.
That must be such a great feeling.
It was great.
Something that's so fascinating about you, Paul, is you were a music major at the State University of New York, otherwise known as SUNY Binghamton, and you wrote the theme song for Mad About You. It's now played at weddings.
Yeah.
How gratifying is that for you?
Well, that's really gratifying. I can honestly say that a degree in music was not necessary to write the theme song to Millie.
Oh, right.
I think it's a simple bluesy progression that I had pretty much in 10th grade. I had it down. But no, that was great fun. That was one of the highlights of the whole thing for me. And again, an accident. 2 weeks before we aired, the pilot aired in '92, Helen Hunt and I were going to New York for some publicity. And in the airport lounge, is Don Was, a legendary producer and and great musician. And he's produced, Bonnie Raitt's Grammy-winning records, everybody, Willie Nelson, Paul McCartney, Elton John, he's done it to everybody. And Helen and he had a mutual friend, so they started talking, and we started talking. And he said, "Oh, what's your theme song?" I said, "Well, we have something that somebody wrote. I don't love it." He goes, "Well, how about you and I write one?" I said, "Well, great, but there's in 2 weeks." He goes, "Well, we could do that." I said, "Well, it have to kind of be tonight." He goes, "Well, let's do it tonight." I went, "There's no shaking you, is there?" So I remember it was just such a thrill. It was all new to me. I had never been in any of this part of the world. And as we got to New York, and that night, 11:30, I go over to the West Side, the record plant, I think it was, and he's finishing up a recording session with Felix Cavallari. I'm going, what world did I just step into that I'm listening to the Rascals, Felix Cavallari, and sitting with Don? And then Don goes, "Well, what do you got?" I said, "Well," and I had been listening to some songs, and I said, I had that opening beat, and then I said, I had an idea of some chords and a melody. He goes, "Well, listen," and he really just taught me, I'm like, "Well, just hit record, and it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't even have to be good yet. It's in the work." So in that fortuitous meeting, I learned so much from him about the process, like just keep going. And he said, I remember there was a cassette that we recorded that night, 2 tracks. First track, I'm playing bass in the left hand and he's strumming guitar, and another one where he's playing drums on the back of his guitar, banging out the rhythm. And I was scat singing with no words. I was going, "See they do, the dad is scat, wow." I'm going, he goes, "Okay, well, who do you think should sing?" I go, "Well, it'd be great. Like Lyle Lovett." He goes, "Let me send this to Lyle Lovett." I go, "You can't send Lyle Lovett that shit that me singing bullshit words. No, I don't think." And he did. And Lyle famously passed on it. And then he ended up being on Mad About You.
Oh, wow.
Friends. And so he and I have been friends for a while. And when we did the revisit 3 years ago, the Mad About You reboot, I called him and I said, "Do you want to do it now?" He goes, "Yes, please." I was crazy to have passed on that. So he did it. There was a duet between him and Keisha. And she is a killer singer, a Broadway star. So the two voices together were really great fun.
You had some really amazing guest stars on Mad About You. And I guess I want to ask you, how surreal was it for you to be acting alongside Carol O'Connor, Carol Burnett, Mel Brooks, and even the noted comedian Yoko Ono?
Yes, noted for her comedy chops. It was thrilling, and it was never not thrilling. And again, life works out in funny ways. We had this really wacky script in the first season that an eccentric millionaire. We said, like Jerry Lewis would be great. And everybody goes, "Well, you're not going to get Jerry Lewis, so what else?" Well, somebody said, "Well, try it." And I don't know how we contacted his agent, and he went, "Yes." And then you come to find out Jerry Lewis shared, he said, "Nobody's ever asked me before."
Wow.
Are you kidding? And it's like, the beautiful girl that everybody's too scared to ask to dance. It's like, nobody wanted to ask Jerry, but we did. And he did the show. And it wasn't our best episode, but it was a thrill, and he was ridiculously funny. And then, we had this character from my uncle. We said Mel Brooks. And Mel Brooks happened to have an office on the same soundstage, on the studio lot where we filmed. So Helen and I walked over and humbly got on our knee and kissed his ring. And the crazy part was Mel didn't think that was out of order.
He liked it.
Kissing the ring is in order. We never took it for granted that Helen and I would pinch ourselves because we all grew up. One of the things that I loved about Helen is that she knew those comedy records by heart. She grew up on Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner records. David Steinberg, big Canadian comedian.
Absolutely.
Icon, who directed dozens of our episodes. He was flattered that Helen knew his albums by heart. And I knew him. Like, somehow you don't expect that Helen Hunt's going to know that album. We were constantly pinching ourselves. And I remember there's one episode particularly, we were with Carol Burnett and Carol O'Connor, and we're just going, "Look at us."
Yeah.
Us two idiots. And of course, when we had Yoko, Yoko, that was just absurd. And that particular episode was basically written. Larry Charles, who is a great writer and director, did Borat, wrote on Seinfeld. He was our executive producer, writer for the fourth and fifth season. So when we had Yoko, and we had Yoko, and she said yes, and then we didn't have a script, and I was and I just had my son was born, and I was distracted, and I was really anxious. I said, we don't have a script. And Yoko's coming, and my anxiety, I was so spinning into circles that Larry was smart enough. He goes, "That's the show." So Paul Buckman should be that crazy that Yoko called, and we don't have anything. And true to form, we had a great script, and we finished the show, and then it came time to do the little tags that we would do that we showed under the credits. There were little 30-second, 40-second things that would sometimes break the fourth wall. We could look into the camera. They weren't part of the show. And the clock is running. We have an audience. We have the crew. And we didn't have an idea. And we're going, what should we do? What if it? And Yoko kind of, timidly raises her hand. She goes, "Can I make a suggestion?" "Yes, please." And she said, "Well, John and I," like, you got me already. Whatever.
Yeah.
Any sense with John. John and I always said, whenever we have a chance to say, give peace a chance, that's what we should do. So maybe the three of us are in bed and we just say, give peace a chance. And we go, okay, yes, please. And so we do this little tag. The credits are rolling. We're in bed. Yoko's in between Helen and I. We're just sitting up reading the New York Times. And the theme song is playing. We're just reading the paper like, well, why wouldn't there be a woman in between us dressed? And then right at the end, Yoko says to the camera, "Give peace a chance." And I think Helen or I go, "This is all we are saying." And went, well, it was the perfect meld of everything that John and Yoko are about with Man About You. It's like, this is all we're saying. But there is a moment, I think it's on camera, where Helen and I look at each other after that and go, this is real. We're in a bed in a fake bed, in a fake reality, but with real Yoko.
That is the definition of surreal.
That is surreal.
I want to ask Beverly Hills Cop with some guy named Eddie Murphy. Now, I don't know if
he played the cop, the DJ. Yes,
you remember him.
Coming back, yes.
I don't know if this is urban myth, Paul. Apparently, Beverly Hills Cop was actually written as a vehicle for Sylvester Stallone, and you, Paul Reiser, were actually cast in the movie before Eddie Murphy. Can you?
Yeah. I'm so tired of Eddie Murphy riding my coattails. His timing flies on. Unless I'm absolutely hallucinating, I do remember. I don't know that it was actually developed for Stallone, but I know he was attached. He was doing it, and I got the script, and it was. I think the director, Martin Brest, had seen Diner. That was the only thing I had done. I just had this thought of, well, this kid's funny, and he should be something. Maybe he could be this cop, Jeffrey Friedman. So I was in it, and I was thinking, well, I get to meet Sylvester Stallone. And then for whatever reason, I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but Stallone, stepped away, and it became Eddie's vehicle. And I knew Eddie already from the comedy club. So I thought, well, that's great. Now I'm getting to play with, I don't get to meet Stallone, that's a drag, but I'll get to play with Eddie. And, piece of advice I would tell anybody, if you want to look good on film, stand next to Eddie Murphy and then just shut up. Just stand still and let Eddie do his thing, because there is nobody funnier or more powerful on film. And but it was great because we got to play, and that this is not my locker line, was improvised because they gave me no exit line. I said, I'm talking to Eddie, and then the boss comes in and he's chewing out Eddie, but I'm standing there. I go, I shouldn't be standing here. I got to get out of here. And I just made up that line, barely even on camera. And still, it's like the only thing people ever remember.
Well, that franchise is still going. I understand that you have completed filming your scenes for Beverly Hills Cop 4, and it would be this summer.
I don't know. I think it's coming out this summer. I'm not sure. But yeah, I did a couple of days on that, and Eddie and I looking at each other going, it's 40 years later. Oh my God. He looks the same. No, look exactly the same. I told him, seeing him on SNL when he 2 or 3 years ago was such a joy. He was just like seeing him, and we were talking about stand up, and I told him I was out doing it. He goes, yeah, I want to do it, but I don't know. I don't want people recording it. I said, well, you can fix that. People collect their phones and, have somebody monitor the audience. There's nobody, and we all would like to see more of them. Eddie.
Yeah.
And I'd be so curious because I was recently watching one of his old specials, and he was ridiculously talented, powerful. And he was 22, 23. And part of his young energy, cocky thing was just sort of telling the world how great he is. But we know that now.
Yeah.
I'm really curious. I mean, love to see what is 63-year-old Eddie, who's a father of many and grandfather, I think, of some. what do it can't be the same. You're not going to
No.
talk about the same stuff you did. But man, his chops, is other level, brilliant.
You hosted Saturday Night Live with
did.
Annie Lennox as the musical guest. What do you think of sketch comedy, and what do you remember about that whole kind of cycle, that 1 week cycle where you host?
Yeah, that wasn't my favorite week. It was such a cool thrill to be on SNL, and I had heard, and so many of my friends had done it, and they said, "Oh, you love it, it's live." And I said, "Well, I do live all the time. Stand up is live, and I've done theater, so I don't want to sound like an ingrate. I mean, I didn't. I also don't think that's my strong suit. I don't know that I'm great in sketch comedy. It's not there are guys who do it great. It's not really my thing. And I also remember it just moving so fast that I would have loved to take some more time. And there is time. There's 7 days, but you really only used 3. And can we write this or finally, can we practice, rehearse this? I mean, it's great. And, you got to marvel at guys who are on it all these years and are great every week, every time. What is it, 45, 7 years or something?
It's amazing.
Ridiculous. So, yeah, I was glad I did. It was fun. I don't think it was my shining moment.
Well, you did get to deliver a shining moment on Curb Your Enthusiasm. You played yourself, but with an actress who was not your wife, playing your wife. Did the general public get confused? They keep asking you why you're...
Well, why do they say your wife's Mindy? Your wife's not Mindy.
Working with Larry David. What was the process like?
Well, I didn't know Larry, and he was also there in the beginning of the comedy club years, and of course when he was doing Seinfeld, we were doing Mad About You. So I remember he called when they did a joke, and he called to clear it with me. There was a famous joke where George Costanza's getting engaged, and he's just fighting and kicking, and his girlfriend, and I think this was under their credits and their tags. George, it's on, and he comes in and she makes him watch Mad About You, and you just hear the theme song, and he goes, "Are you okay with that?" I said, "That's really funny." I said, "Yes, please." But I don't know. I remember that week getting a call. "Can you come down and play with Larry in this scene?" And I said, "Yeah." And you don't get a script. Larry just comes over and goes, "All right, you're at the table, and the joke is," and I say hello to you, but I don't say hello to your wife. And just ad lib. It's all right. And then he said, then we do another take. He said, another storyline we may or may not use is I'm opening a restaurant. So ask me about my restaurant. Okay. And then we do another scene. He goes, and there's another storyline. Wow, how do you hold all this in your head? Because he has to then decide which threads to pull and put together. So I remember his direction, as it was, basically hitting 3 different story points, and he'll decide later which to use. And then I did a short-lived show that that was short-lived, and he was nice enough to come on, and we had it was a really funny episode. They only aired 2, and I think this was the first one they aired, which was a mistake, frankly, but it's unavailable, sadly. You can't even find this. But I played me, and he played him, and the joke was I had been offered to host a game show, or I thought that was beneath me, but then I heard Larry was offered, and I thought, well, it's beneath him too. And then we're getting competitive. It's well, if you're going to do it. So we had the scene in a restaurant, and we just ad-libbed for an hour and a half. And that was his only condition. He goes, "I'll do the show, but no script." I went, "Done, whatever you say." And it was great fun to play. It's playing tennis with somebody better than you. Which I always say, you want to get good, play with somebody better than you. But that doesn't work for one of the 2 people. Somebody's getting screwed.
That's right. It's not the best relationship. Someone's going to benefit.
Somebody will benefit.
Now, on that note, when you talk about Larry David, you got to talk about Jerry Seinfeld. Would you have come up in the stand-up world at the same time as him?
Yeah. In fact, he was a year ahead of me. But in the earlier days, on audition night at that particular club, at the Comedy Shop, it was the MCs that would get to pick the ones who, tap them on the shoulder for greatness and say, "You're accepted. You can now join the roster." And Jerry was there a year, so he was the top comic in the club. And he passed. And one night, it was the trilogies. Carol Leifer, who was an old friend and wrote for Seinfeld, and Rich Hall, who went on to great things, and myself were the 3 auditioners that passed on the same night in 1978, I guess, 1978. And Jerry was always, clearly great and disciplined, and always would go up with his little piece of paper he would take out with 3 very neatly written bullet points, jokes that he wrote that day. And they'd all be, if not great, clearly going to be something. He was all there from the beginning. This guy is just really good and efficient and meticulous.
Paul, when you return to the stage yourself as a stand-up on your tour, March 18th, the Rose Brampton, tickets available now at therosebrampton.ca. How different is your material? I mean, I don't think you ever did political
I still
stuff.
talk about being in college. Is that wrong?
You gotta... But even today, you didn't do political humor before, but I can imagine today it's even better to stay away from that.
Oh, I stay away from it. But it's not a great decision for me to do. I mean, it's not a particularly tough decision. I've never done political humor. And now it's a pretty high stakes game. So unless you're going to do it really well and you have really something innovative or insightful to contribute, it's better to shut up. But I also know, so I've never done that. And my thing is I tell people I don't even make up jokes. I'm just telling you what happened in my house. But it was funny to me. Hopefully it's funny to you. And it is funny to them because they're going, oh, that's my house too, buddy. That's my wife. That's my kid. That's the same fight I just had with my, trying to upload an app or download an app on my phone.
Yeah.
But what I've also noticed is that when you tell people up front that you're not going to talk about politics, they're so happy. They're just like, yeah, there's so much news and there's such overload that when you tell them we're just going to have fun, they go, oh, thank you. It's like, that's a sort of an extra bonus that wasn't there years ago. People were walking around so tense.
Yeah.
The idea of not discussing the news would be a great relief. But that's where we're at.
Yep, that is where we're at.
So I tell people they can come and relax. They can leave the news at the door. There will be nothing of any consequence discussed in my show.
Except at the end, Paul, I believe you do a Q&A, which I think you enjoy, but do you enjoy that uncertainty?
The audience hates it. Oh, yeah.
But do you enjoy the uncertainty of not knowing what they're going to ask, or you enjoy that?
Yeah. Well, what I do is they write out cards on the way in, and I take them and I'll read them. So if something is truly offensive, I don't. But I find that you'll get a better quality question if they're writing it down, because people might not want to stand up and be, called on, or you might get somebody who's too eager to stand up and bring the house down with his cleverness. So I'll read the questions, and if it's stupid or offensive, I just don't read it. But yeah, they're very surprising. But you also get a sense of who people are. So it's not even just the question. Sometimes it's just the handwriting or the politeness of the question, which is the fun of it. And I always go, well, who wrote? Sometimes the names are on this. I go, all right, who's Cheryl B? And then that's and the audience has a great time because I didn't write this stuff. You guys did. And I always preface it with, you wrote the question. So if this turns out to be not funny, that's on you.
That is on you. Now, in addition to your stand-up, Paul, I understand you have also recently completed filming in Ireland for your own original comedy feature film called The Problem with People. What is this project about, and why'd you base it in Ireland?
I based it in Ireland because I wanted to go to Ireland. That's why I wrote the movie.
Good reason.
I'd been to Ireland years ago, and I just loved it. And the inspiration, there was a movie in the 80s called Local Hero, which was Burt Lancaster and Peter Rieger. And Peter Rieger plays a young business guy who works for an oil company. He goes to Scotland, not Ireland, but to buy up the oil rights and blah, 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 and ends up falling in love with this quaint little town, and it sort of seduces him. And I just said, oh, that's exactly the kind of movie I want to make. And so in all the years I was looking, nobody ever gave me one. So I said, well, I'll just write it. So I wrote this movie, but it took a while to come up with the premise. The premise was, the reason it's called The Problem with People, it's based on two leads. It's myself and Colm Meaney, who's a great, great Irish actor. You've seen him in everything. And we play distant cousins who've never met, relatives, third generation, fourth generation apart. And our great-grandfathers had a falling out. Our great-grandfathers were brothers, and they had a falling out over something stupid 100 years ago. And so we've not been allowed to talk, and the American side doesn't talk to the Irish side. And he's decided it's time we should bury the hatchet, and it's silly, and we can't solve the problems of the world, but maybe we can heal our family. And he invites me over, and I go, well, why not? I'll go to Ireland with the intention of raising a pint and burying the hatchet. And then it goes horribly bad. And we ended up, in as many fights and squabbles as our ancestors. And so it's actually about something kind of meaningful, but it's a really funny comedy. And Jane Levy, who's a wonderful actress, plays my daughter, and she's a great Irish cast, and it's beautiful. So we're just finishing the final touches on it, and hopefully be out. Might hopefully even be in the Toronto Film Festival in the fall. So
excellent.
So yeah, it'll be out later this year, but and I'll come back and talk about it because I'm very proud of it.
Well, that would be fantastic. As we close up, I want to thank you for all your time. It's been great meeting you and getting all your stories. What do you want to say to the people of Brampton and Toronto and Canada ahead of your March 18th show?
Well, I first of all, I would beseech you to come down. There are 4 shows. You can go to my website, paulreiser.com, and pick your theater closest to you. Because like Elvis, I don't have a lot of things in common with Elvis, but like Elvis, I don't go on stage if I see an empty chair. And that's how Elvis, however, he would have guys that if there were unsold seats, they would unscrew the seats. So
Really?
They'd throw them out. So like, well, whatever's left, they're filled. I don't have the capability of that. So that's so important that people come and put their asses in the chairs. But I will see you there.
Absolutely.
But what did your mother want to say? That's what you got me intrigued.
Well, we are going to be there. And now that you've opened the door to this, I just want to warn you, Paul, if you appear to her to be even 1 pound under the weight from your Mad About You days, you know you're going to end up being dragged into a dinner to fatten you back up. So
well, let me say, being underweight is not an issue.
Okay.
Has not been an issue since 1972. On the other hand, she may look at me and go, you know what? You're going to come over to my house and you're going to eat kelp.
Yeah. Well, it could be. And you'll also appreciate it won't be at her house anymore. It will be at Boca Vista Phase 2.
Oh, cool.
So
it's Boca Vista, but it's in Toronto?
Yeah, exactly. We have an outlet there now.
Of course you do. Well, for goodness sake, come back with Mom and say hello.
We absolutely will.
All right.
Please,
Pleasure
everyone.
talking to you. Thank you for your extensive research. You know more about me than I do, so you can carry on in my stead.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your time. Please, everyone, follow everything Paul at paulreiser.com. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, man. Pleasure talking to you. Nicely done.
The pleasure was mine.
That's going to do it for this different episode of the Ted Wallachin podcast. And you've actually been listening to Toronto Legends with the host Andrew Applebaum, and an interview he did with great talent Paul Reiser. What a talented man he is, for sure. And we want to thank Andrew for the opportunity to run one of his episodes. If you go over to his website, which is www.torontolegends.ca/episodes/ you'll be able to hear one of our episodes with the legendary broadcaster Roger Ashby. Next week, we're back to normal. In the meantime, check out some of our past episodes at tedwallachin.ca. That's www.tedwallachin.ca. And don't forget, while you're online, fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You too could change or even save a life. Have a great week.
The Ted Wallachin podcast has been brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices. It's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallachin podcast is produced by Becky Coles. That's me. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. To talk to Ted and for more information on his podcast and our sponsors, go to www.tedwallachin.ca.